Thank you so much for that introduction. As Lars said, I am Hannah Schwartz. I'm 15 years old and I'm a Jewish student at Northern Secondary School. I'm here to talk to you all about small acts of hate. I'd like to start off my presentation about talking about heroes. For my definition of heroes, I automatically think of superheroes, the ones with the capes and superpowers. I've recently realized that my definition has changed drastically. I now realize that to be a hero is to advocate for yourself in face of diversity. I realize that to be a hero doesn't mean to be a hero to the world, but in your community. I try my best to be a leader in my community. Recently, my school wasn't going to have a Holocaust Remembrance Day assembly. They said this because they didn't have enough time in the schedule to take kids outside of school, but then they would cut school for football games, etc. I then realized that I had to stand up for my community. After emailing many people, I got Ellie Gotts, a Holocaust survivor, to come to our school to speak to us, not only about his experience as a 15-year-old in concentration camps, but about the repercussions of hate in communities. I then, after this, got to experience an amazing event as a panelist with Raoul Wallenberg, who is my personal hero, as he stood up for many people. I'm not the only one who does this, though. A friend of mine, Bella, has also started a scholarship for the Moon and Stars. It's called the Moon and Stars, which is, I asked her about why she started this, and she said after the events of October 7th, she realized that the school was divided, and she has aimed to fundraise money for this scholarship to the person who does the best at creating a hate-free environment at our school. When I talk about mine and my friends' experience with anti-Semitism, it seems to always start with October 7th, although this is not when anti-Semitism started. I and many others have faced anti-Semitism their whole life, but after October 7th, I realized the difference. I first thought that anti-Semitism was only considered such if it was an act of violence. I now realize this isn't true. It can start with small acts of hate. On my screen behind me, you can see many texts that my peers face on a daily basis. We receive texts like these from people we don't even know. I never personally was discouraged by this. Of course, it was on social media. I didn't know these people. When it truly started to impact me when it was in my schools. I'd have my own personal friends post things like from the river to the sea. I understood that they didn't understand what this meant, so I spoke with them. And of course, their first reactions was always, this isn't about you as a person. This is about what's happening in Israel. But what they didn't understand was attacking me. It was not only attacking me, but my family and many of their other friends. I then realized that this wasn't the first time I had faced this. Throughout my whole life I have. In middle school, I was the only Jewish kid in my school. So they all had started calling me the Jew, the Jewish friend. They told me that my religion wasn't real and that it was just another form of Christianity. I of course explained to them this wasn't true. I then moved on to high school, thinking this would stop, but instead, it got worse. Not only my friends would call me the Jew, but everyone in my school did. They'd yell in the halls, Jew, and then it got worse. People who weren't my friends tried to make joking remarks about the Holocaust. They'd say, I wish your whole family had died in the Holocaust in a gas chamber. I wish Hitler was back. I was astonished that people would make such jokes about such a serious issue. I then, of course, talked to them, and they told me that they did not mean to make these remarks and that they were trying to make a joke. I let it slide because they're teenagers. They make mistakes. And then it continued. Turns out they did not stop. They just went behind my back. I heard from other people that they told people who were my friends and people who weren't my friends, let's make a website called Hannah Schwartz. You could promote a Jew or demote a Jew. I found this ridiculous. Why would they bring my religion into discussion where I wasn't even involved in? This kept on happening. I eventually told my parents because I was upset. They told me that this was very serious and I should report it. I found myself saying, I'm just being overdramatic and oversensitive, repeating the same things that my friends had told me to say. If you had asked me if I had ever experienced bullying, I'd immediately say no. But if you had asked me if I experienced anti-Semitism, I'd say practically on the daily. I started thinking of the definition of bullying and how throughout all of elementary school, we went to assembly after assembly on bullying. We learned about the bully, the victim, and the bystanders, and how we should never be one. I then realized when we got to high school, we seemed to forget these basic principles. We seemed to instead allow people to continue bullying and harassing other students. I looked to my peers and I realized the definition of a teenager, which I think when we all think of one, is a person becoming an adult. Someone probably insecure and don't know who they are. I find my peers repeatedly showing this in their actions. I try my best to do what I can for my friends, but it becomes very hard in these environments. I was recently at Ellie Gott's, my family friend, a Holocaust survivor's house. We were reading through manuscripts of other Holocaust survivors. I ended up on this one, from talking about his school experiences. The quotes start by saying, "They started to make anti-Semitic remarks at schools. My friends came and said, 'Oh, you are different. You are a good Jew. You are clean, you don't smell, and you speak like us.' It was hard to admit, but I felt happy. I'm a good Jew." Then, 2 years later, he says, "Anti-Semitism was rapid. We Jews started to be blamed for everything. Comments were more aggressive, a bit less friendly, and there were more physical attacks." And then he says, "Suddenly, school was over. Immediately, we put on our yellow stars." We need to teach people that they cannot be bystanders. Words will turn into violence. We need to stop things early. We need to tell students that they need to stand up for their friends. I immediately think back to Raoul Wallenberg, someone who wasn't Jewish. He stood up not for his community, but just people. He showed what a true hero is in our community. I read this manuscript and I can only stop to reflect on my own life and how this is what's happening in our schools. It always starts with small acts of hate, but those can turn into acts of violence. The difference between me and this story was simply over 70 years. But this was a young boy and hungry. We still see the repercussions of our history repeating itself. And that's why we have to learn from our past to move on in our future. This brings me back to my main point. People keep on seeming to tell me, this isn't Nazi Germany. This isn't the Holocaust. You can't be oversensitive and overdramatic about this. But I don't understand why. This is my religion. This is my faith. This is my family. This is who I am as a person. When October 7th happened, I didn't feel remorse because there was a war. I felt hurt as if my family was hurt. This isn't a story about Jewish people. This is a story about people. But this time, it'll be a different story with different heroes. Thank you so much for listening to me.